Hello dear learner, I welcome you to the lecture 3 of week 11, and the topic of today's lecture is the continuation of lecture 1 and 2, and the topic is the critique of theory and practice of caste. So, we have been studying in our lecture 2 various viewpoints of Mr. Jyotirao Phule on caste system, and we will continue with his views in today's lecture. Then we will understand his theory of the reinterpretation of the non-Aryan theory of invasion. Then third, we will study about the various non-Brahmin or Adi Hindu movements. Then we will also understand the various reasons for the weakening of these movements. So let us now understand something more about the Jyotirao Phule's ideas on caste, how he made a critique of caste system. Now, Jyotirao Phule's innovation lay in overturning the ideological foundation of the Brahmanical order, because we have already mentioned that Jyotirao Phule has criticized the Brahmanical basis of Hinduism, and he has argued that it has formed the basis or it has provided the sanctity to the Indian caste system. Therefore, he has argued that without attacking the ideological foundations of Brahmanism, the caste system actually cannot be done away with. And in order to address this issue, he devised an alternative mythology or a counter narrative, and this he did by first of all inverting the then prevalent notion of Aryan invasion theory. Now, what was the Aryan invasion theory? Brahmins have descended from these Indo-Europeans who were cruel invaders, subdued the local aboriginal population through violence and mythology of caste. Now, this was the reinterpretation of the Aryan invasion theory. Whereas the traditionally accepted Aryan invasion theory meant that there was a golden period which was marked by the advent of Aryans, where we had Vedas, and it was a period of prosperity and peace. So, Brahmins considered the Aryan period or the Aryan era as a golden era where we had great scriptures in the form of Vedas or Vedic period. Now, Phule has completely inverted this theory. He said that actually the golden period existed before the Aryans invaded India, and these Aryans were the predecessors of the present day Brahmins, and these were very cruel, and by the use of conceit and by the use of violence they have tried to establish their hold over the original inhabitants of India, and the original inhabitants of India were considered by Phule to be the Dalit population or the marginalized population belonging to the lower caste of Indian society. And another very important instrument which was used by the Aryans in order to maintain their hold over the original inhabitants was through the imposition of the caste system, and therefore the invasion was followed by a conflict, and in this conflict the original inhabitants, they fought against the Aryans, and after they were defeated in this war, they were pushed by the Brahmins to the lowest rung of the society. So, it was basically after the invasion of Aryans that the position of the original inhabitants of India, they started degenerating, and the caste system was established after the invasion of Aryans. Therefore, Phule argued that this cannot be considered the ideal period or the golden era of India. Now, Phule equated the Aryan invasion to the Western colonization drive in their destruction of the native population. So, Phule had a global understanding of the various forms of discrimination and injustices which were practiced across the world. And he made a comparison of this Aryan invasion with the Western practices of imperialism and colonialism, and argued that both the practices are similar in nature. They both invaded and they looted and they exploited the original inhabitants and then established their rules over them. Based on this theory, he united the Shudras or non-Brahmins and the Ati-Shudras and Dalits. So, this narrative or this theory provided a binding force to unite all those non-Brahmins population in the form of Dalits or Ati-Shudras, so that they can unite and they can develop their alternative identity, and they can unitedly, based on this counter narrative, can challenge the dominant, which is the Brahminical tradition of Hindu caste system. Since Ati-Shudras fought against the Brahmin domination, they were downgraded and oppressed. As we have already mentioned, that in this fight between the Aryans and the local inhabitants, the aboriginals or the local people who are the so-called, who later became Dalit and Shudras, they fought, and in this fight they were defeated, and after the defeat they were pushed to the lowest rung of the society in the name of the caste system. Phule considered the Kshatriyas as the native inhabitants of the land, who actually resisted the Aryan onslaught and were labelled as Shudras. He said that it was the Kshatriyas who were the original inhabitants of India, because Kshatriyas are those who rule over a particular kshetra. But unfortunately, when they lost the battle with the Aryans, they were labelled as Shudras or the downtrodden, and they became very marginalized, or they were made marginalized. Besides these inversion of the Aryan theory of invasion, Phule also fought for the education of lower caste and the woman, because he knew that education is the most powerful tool for the empowerment or raising the awareness amongst the oppressed class, and also amongst the women who are also one of the most marginalized sections of the community. And this is proof from his own life, that he was so much in favor of the empowerment of women when he encouraged his own wife Savitribai Phule to actually get educated and become a teacher in a girls' school. He faced lots of resistance from his own family because they did not have a child, and he was under lots of pressure from his family to remarry. But he tried very hard and he raised voice against such demands by the family, and he educated his wife, and both played a very important role in the emancipation of women. And he not only questioned patriarchy and oppression of women, but he also questioned about the conditions of the Shudra woman, because he believed that out of the general category of women, the Shudra or the Dalit women, they were the most exploited. And if we are talking about the emancipation of women, we have to first take into consideration how those women who belong to the Dalit community, how they can be emancipated, how they can be freed from all the chains of caste system. Now, with the support of his wife Savitribai Phule, he went on to open the first school for girls by an Indian in 1848. So, you can understand that during that period, education for a woman and after getting education becoming a teacher was a very big achievement. And you can understand how much Phule fought for the rights of the woman and how much efforts he would have made to stand by her side so that she can get educated and she can work for the empowerment of other women by getting empowered herself. Now, his thought processes were influenced by a very important thinker, Thomas Paine, and his book The Rights of Man, which was most read pamphlet for reform in Britain in 1790s. Now, Phule is known for many important work, and one of them is Gulamgiri. And this work was originally, it was written in the language of Marathi and it was published in the year 1885. Phule attacked Hinduism. He challenged its legitimacy and questioning its existence. You can see that Phule has provided an alternative narrative, a counter narrative. He believed that it is a religion which is the source of the caste system in India. If we want to challenge the caste system, we have to challenge all those precepts or principles of religion which provides a sanctity to the caste system. And therefore, Phule attacked Hinduism, challenging its legitimacy. How can a religion can advocate for perpetuating such a hierarchical relation? And he went to the extent of even questioning its existence. Further, along with this, he believed that knowledge, education and science was necessary for the empowerment of the exploited class. Knowledge is empowerment, science is empowerment, and education, of course, is a means by which we can attain knowledge. Because if you just have a look at the conditions of the people who belong to the lower caste during that period, then you will see that they were deprived of all sorts of education and they were prohibited to read books or to read the ancient Indian scriptures like Vedas and Upanishads. So, they were totally cut off from the world of knowledge, and they were also asked to stay in a secluded place, and there was so much of restrictions and prohibitions on their social activities. So, they were not also allowed to interact with the larger mass of the society. So, the result was that they totally became cut off from the real world, and they did not know that what were the reasons behind their exploitation. And since they considered their present status as the work of destiny or as ordained by God, it has been sanctified by religion, so they thought that they cannot change it, and it create a type of desperation. It create a sort of a pessimistic attitude amongst the Dalit section, who thought that they have no other option but to stay in where they have been placed by so called the nature. And the result was that they could not revolt. They were not even conscious of their right. So, Phule believed that with the help of education they will gain knowledge, and with the help of knowledge they will be aware about their conditions, aware about their exploitation, and after becoming aware they will raise voices and they will ask for the transformation of the society. And what is the need of science? Science is needed to cultivate a rational attitude. Science is needed to cultivate an attitude of reason, so that we can question anything and we should not accept anything or everything which comes to us. So, this attribute of questioning and finding evidence to everything that we are believing and accepting is an essential attribute of science. So, he asked the members belonging to the marginalized section to first of all get educated, and also along with that they should develop a scientific temperament. And most importantly, he wanted Shudras to develop their self-esteem and have their own independent thinking. I think this was one of the most important aspect regards the emancipation of Dalits, which has been stressed by Phule and which has been stressed by all other subsequent thinkers who have asked for the emancipation of Dalits. If you take the example of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he has also emphasized upon the need of developing self-confidence and self-respect amongst the Dalits. So, therefore, Phule also argued that they should develop their own self-esteem, which they have lost because of the oppressive structure of the caste system. And more so, he wanted that they should develop an independent thinking. They should not be guided and manipulated by external forces. It may be religion, it may be certain social custom. So, he wanted that he should be able to challenge all those irrational attitudes, customs and traditions, and be able and should have the potential to think independently in an autonomous manner without getting dominated by any external factors. Now, the non-Brahman movement in Maharashtra and Punjab were influenced by this Aryan conquest theory and the Brahminic exploitation through religion. Now, besides the influence of Phule, we find that there were other non-Brahmin movements which arose in Maharashtra and Punjab, and they were also influenced by the Aryan conquest theory and the Brahminic exploitation through religion. These movements, they began in 1920s and were also named as New Dalit or Adi movements. Adi means first. They were also known as Adi Hindu movements. And the objective is to stress upon the fact that these people or the Dalits, they were the original inhabitants of India before the Hindus came into India. Now, Adi Dravida Educational League, which was established as part of this movement, claimed that the Dravidas were the real inhabitants or aboriginals of Deccan. So, if you try to see the origin of these movements and the spread and contribution of these movements in the south, then we can associate it with the Adi Dravid movements. Adi Dravid movements also claimed that the original inhabitants of south, that is Dravids, they are the real inhabitants, and they also believed that they were invaded upon by Aryans and they were subdued and they were being relegated to the lowest section of the society. They also claim that Hinduism is not the ancestral religion of the Dravidians. So, they also objected to the fact that Hinduism is their ancient religion or their mother religion, because they believe that they had their own alternative beliefs, practices, god, goddess, which may not be same as we find in Hinduism. So, they do not accept and they have rejected all the cultures and traditions of Hinduism. And they despised also Manusmriti and refused to be called Hindus. If you see the Census of India 1933 report, we will find that they had great hatred for the ancient scripture which is known as Manusmriti, because they believed that it has sanctified the hereditary caste system in India. Many leaders like Manguram from Punjab, Bhagyareddy Verma from Hyderabad and Kisan Bansode from Maharashtra were actually the representatives of a new movement which began in 1920s. So, you can see that this new radical Dalit movement, it started occurring in various parts of India, whether it is Punjab or Maharashtra or Hyderabad and also Tamil Nadu, and they all were characterized by certain common features, and those features are: first, the Shudras or the original inhabitants are Adi Hindus. Adi Hindus means that they have come or they have occupied the land before the so called Hindu people or Hindu population. The outsiders, Aryans, invaded the land and captured it by deceit or force, and they considered that the so called Hindu population or the Brahmin population, they have come from outside and they have invaded the land, and after capturing it, they have actually captured it by deceit, by manipulation and also by force. And they believe that the original inhabitants of Bharat were prosperous and peace loving. So, this is another very important aspect of their golden period or of their version of golden period. And fourth, there was no existence of caste before the Aryan invasion. We find that there was no caste and it was a casteless society. So, it was only after the invasion of Aryans that caste system was introduced, and people, they had no option but to accept it. The Aryan invaders actually subjugated the original inhabitants, and this they did through various laws, mythology and caste system. It is very important. They used various strategies, they used various means to subdue the local population, and some of the means were by actually building strong laws with the help of mythology or religious rules and regulations, and ultimately with the help of a social structure which is caste system. And these movements were characterized by strong resistance to Brahmanism and caste hierarchy. They all have challenged the Brahminical basis or foundation of caste system or the authority of the Brahmins, and they have challenged the hierarchical structure of caste in the society. So, these are some of the common features which we find among these radical Dalit movements of 1920s. But unfortunately, in spite of providing an alternative perspective, in spite of developing a counter narrative, there were some important reasons which led to the weakening or the dilution of their objectives. And it was because of certain developments and also because of some of the failures or the weaknesses of other parties or people belonging to other groups in the Indian society at that time. And the first important development is there were attempts to identify and win back Dalits to the Hindu society by organizations such as Hindu Mahasabha and Arya Samaj. Now, it was time also of the, you can say, the Hindu revivalism with the establishment of organizations like RSS, then Hindu Mahasabha and also Arya Samaj, and they were envisioning a wider Hindu identity, and that Hindu identity can be developed only by incorporating the Dalits into them. So, there were various attempts, at least at the theoretical level and also at the practical level, to unite the Hindu community who were divided across caste, and there were alternative perspectives and narratives being advanced by the Dalit community. And the second was emphasizing upon Valmiki and Vyas as people of low caste origin and their contribution to creation of the two greatest epics of Hinduism we know, that Ramayana and Mahabharata. So, these two great scholars, after they were being identified as people belonging to lower caste, the attempt was to underline that how even the marginalized, even so called the people belonging to low caste, they have played such an important role, as we find in the writing of two greatest epics which are so much revered by the Hindus, which is known as Ramayana and Mahabharata. Now, third is a leftist perspective who understood the exploitation and problems in the Indian society in terms of class rather than caste. Now, it was because of the Marxist influences, they were trying to interpret everything in terms of either economic system and understanding the economic relation with the help of class. And we know that if we try to interpret the exploitation and oppression in the Indian society only through the lens of class, then a very large aspect of the problem, which is due to caste, will be totally overlooked. And that actually happened. They overlooked or undermined the role the caste system is playing in maintaining an oppressive structure in the society and how that is also responsible for exploitation and domination. Similarly, another important point was the national movement leaders' primary emphasis on fighting the British imperialism and their not so much importance being given to fighting against the caste system or the feudalistic structure. Now, this is also one of the very important weakness or characteristic of our Indian national movement, which was primarily dominated by the urge to gain political independence first. It was dominated by the urge to fight against imperialism and gain independence. And it was believed that once independence is achieved, then all other problems which are associated with the social and economic system, they will be automatically resolved, because it was believed that when the rule is in the hand of the native rulers, then all the problems will be solved. But the Dalit leaders, they knew that with the postponement of the reforms in the social sector, it will lead to the continuation of those exploitative practices even after independence is won. And they were afraid and apprehensive that after independence, all the political institutions will be dominated by people who belong to the upper caste. But anyway, since the emphasis of the national movement or the national leaders was primarily on attaining independence and fighting against imperialism, that was also one of the reasons it diluted the movement. And you will see that because the communist movement failed to integrate the problem of caste with their assertion of class as the basis of exploitation, it let some people from the Dalit caste to join either the national movement or the communist based class movement. Now, you can see that because of the divisions we find in the mainstream nationalist discourse, the Dalit perspective or the Dalit narrative also got divided, because some people, they thought that we must participate in the national movement and first of all fight for our own independence. And some of them thought that if we want to end the exploitation, it can be done only by overthrowing the feudalistic structures of the society. So, it led to somehow dilution of the agenda or the objectives of these movements. So, therefore, the third narrative of anti-caste, anti-Hindu and non-Aryans as a true inhabitants theory, it got diluted, as I have been emphasizing upon. Now, with this we actually come to the end of this lecture, but I would like to mention the name of Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar, who is also known as Baba Saheb. He is one of the most important leaders who tried to transcend all these fragmentations and divisions within the Indian national movement or the political scenario at the time, and carried forward very strongly the narrative of the anti-Brahmanical understanding of social system in his long period of struggle against the caste system. So, in the next lecture, we will be studying in detail Ambedkar's perspective on the theory and practice of caste. What were the arguments which were given by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and how he was influenced by the Phule's ideas and all other traditions which were earlier to him. For example, he was also influenced by the Buddhist tradition. So, we will understand in some more detail the ideas of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar on caste in the subsequent lecture. So, with that I come to the end of this lecture, followed by certain questions which are based on the topics which have been covered in today's lecture. First, explain Phule's Aryan invasion theory and its significance for anti-caste struggles. Because this theory is very important, because it provided the foundation or base for the series of anti-caste struggles which took place during the colonial period and also after independence. It has influenced so many scholars and Dalit activists after independence. And the second is, what were the important features of new Dalit or Adi movements in 1920s. So, we have discussed in our lecture what were those common features, or you can say what were the important features of the Dalit narrative of the theory and also the practice of caste. So, you have to write all those features under this question. Third is, write important reasons which are responsible for the weakening of Dalit movements. So, we have seen that what were the important developments, and these were the very broad political developments which were taking place at that time, and every point can be discussed in much detail. Every point is having its own complexities, various shades and dimensions, but we have discussed only in brief the most important points or political developments which were taking place at that time and which had somehow diluted the agenda of this Dalit politics to a large extent. So, with this I come to the end of this lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it, and thank you very much.